Opening slide graphic text title, Building a Bigger We with Tom Kohler. Images of Tom Kohler, text, Purpose Matters Conference, logos belong matters and talks that matter.net.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. And I want to thank all the people that have managed the electronic magic that supports all this. It's a great mystery to me, and I'm deeply appreciative. I'm also appreciative and honored to be with you right after being able to hear Zaina. And we've known each other for 30, maybe 40 years, and she has been, I would say, a bit of a North Star for me personally, and certainly for the work that I've done. So, I mean, again, I just want to, great to be with her, and just to say that as she was speaking, I closed my eyes and tried to listen very closely, and everything she said made just so much sense to me, and I could feel that it was part of the underpinning of the work that I've done over these years. So I have worked for Chatham Savannah Citizen Advocacy for 40 years, and I'll be telling some stories that come from that. In 25 minutes, I've come to believe, I mean, what can I do in 25 minutes? My intent today is to be provocative rather than pedantic. If you hear things that are provocative over the next 25 minutes, then we can have a deeper conversation in one way or another as time goes by. Next slide, please. Well, I am what I call a born and stayed Savannian. I've lived in Savannah for 68 of my 70 years. And this slide is important to me because it says so much about so many things to me anyway. You'll notice that the land, the water, and the sky, all three horizons, you see all three of those interconnecting all three planes. And then this bridge that connects Savannah and our next state, South Carolina, the idea of bridge, and then the idea of sunset. So to me, this is just a slide that there's a lot that speaks to me in this particular slide. Next, please. In terms of purpose, I really hadn't thought about this until recently. When I was growing up during the summertime, my mother would send my brother and I out every single morning to play, so she didn't have to put up with us. And every morning she sent us out with 2 pieces of peppermint, and she would say, "This is one for you, and this is one for the person that you're going to meet." And so in a strange sort of way, maybe this has been my purpose, really, is to become a matchmaker, which is what I have done through the citizen advocacy model for many, many years. Next slide, please. This is Arthur Piegler on the right and Billy Holt on the left at a minor league baseball game. Arthur's mother was my 5th grade teacher, so we have known each other for a very long time. Billy Holt was someone I met much later in life as an adult. He lived in a board and care home and really did not have anything much going on in his life. He also was, quite frankly, being financially taken advantage of by a out-of-town brother. So I recruited Arthur to become his citizen advocate, and both men accepted the opportunity to get to know each other. And I guess a summary I would offer here is that Arthur said to me once, he said, "You know, this is unbelievable to me. Billy and I grew up in the same town at the same time on the same side of town. And yet it's like we've lived in 2 completely different worlds." And this goes to what Zaina was saying about the power of, unfortunately, the power of segregation. Next, please. This is Dickie Stone on your left and Robert Cohen on your right. These gentlemen have known each other for almost 20 years now after I matched them up. Robert was having a hard time finding work after he had left his schooling. And I asked Dickie if he might get to know Robert and help with some connections and help him think through those sorts of things. Turns out Robert really wasn't that interested in a job. What he was really interested in was building a huge social life and a huge social network, which he's done a beautiful job of. He's authored 8 books of poetry by now, and Dickie they've become very, very close friends. I ran into Robert just recently just happened to run into Robert, and he told me that Dickie was going to Singapore for a month. I no longer work in the citizen advocacy office, but again, just living in this community, I get to see people, hear people, and realize that people have maintained these relationships for decades. Next slide, please. This is Tanya Salmons on your left and Heather Mullis on your right. Heather had a youngster very early in her life and comes from very hard circumstance. I'll leave it at that. Tanya lived 2 neighborhoods away, but a world away, if you will. Although Tanya grew up hard scrabble in West Virginia and Tanya has helped Heather be what I would call a good enough mother to raise now that little girl who's now in her late 20s and 3 other children. Heather has married and finally found a good man and married. And most recently, Tanya helped Heather's son, who had graduated from high school, get his first job. And he got a job with a big shipping company that we happen to have relationships with. Next slide, please. This is Janie Johnson and a little girl named Rachel. Rachel was unfortunately beaten almost to death by her mother's boyfriend and was at Memorial Hospital in the intensive care unit. A friend of mine who worked at the hospital called me and told me about Rachel. And I had met Janie earlier, Miss Johnson earlier. She'd been suggested to me as someone who had a big brain and a big heart. And after meeting her and talking with her and listening, I realized that she was exactly that person. So I called her one night and just said, I've just been told about a little girl in the hospital who doesn't have anyone in this town. Her mother was from Pennsylvania and was here with her boyfriend who was in the military, the beater of the child. And Janie said, and I said, can you go to the hospital? Will you go to the hospital and stand by that child? And she took that literally and went to the hospital that night at 10 o'clock and talked her way into the intensive care unit. She was the first person to realize that Rachel had not been blinded. The nurses had missed that. And then when it came time for Rachel to leave the hospital, Janie had begun talking with all sorts of people about Rachel. And one of those people that Janie talked to their next door neighbor. And the next door neighbor said, it's funny you tell us this because Frank and I, her husband, the neighbor's husband, we've been talking about adopting a child. And that's where Rachel lived the rest of her life until she passed away, unfortunately, in her 20s. Next slide, please. This is Brenda Gasper on your left and Mylene and Jim Dempsey next to Brenda. Brenda was living in her family home place left to her by her mother and father. Unfortunately, her 3 brothers were each more shiftless than the other, and she was getting no social support and was beginning to fall into sort of people beginning to question whether or not she could live on her own, quote, and we're talking about taking her out of her home and putting her in a group home or something like that. Would have been very, very difficult for Brenda because she loved her neighborhood. She had a route every afternoon. She went and visited different people in different stores, and the neighborhood was really her world. Mylene heard about citizen advocacy when a board member went and made a presentation to a civic group. She expressed some interest, and I sat with her over a coffee, and I asked her the question I usually ask most people, which is, would you mind telling me your long story? And she said, what do you mean? I said, well, you can start with your grandparents or you can start with where you were born. And she told me her long story. And I listened, and then we parted company. And the next day she called me and said, I just want to say, you must think, I just wanted to call you because you must think I'm just a mess of a person. And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, well, and I said, hey, listen, from hot ovens comes strong steel. That's what I saw and heard. So match these two women. One of the great stories is they were supposed to be doing something really serious one day, and they dropped by a department store to do something. And instead of doing what they were supposed to, they both bought bathing suits and just went to the beach and had a big day at the beach just on the spur of the moment. On a more serious note, when Brenda would be going through hard times, she would come live at the Dempsey's house. She had her own bedroom there. And then as Brenda aged and passed away, Mylene had a cot at her bedside in the hospital, and she and Jim arranged the funeral, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide, please. This is Dolores Wilson on your left and Richard Lane on your right. Dolores retired from the sheltered workshop here in Savannah. And after she retired, she felt fairly isolated, quite frankly. She also was having a bit of trouble managing her finances because one of the social workers at the workshop had helped her with that. Richard is a financial planner. He lives one neighborhood away from Dolores, but worlds away in other ways. We brought these two people together for some kitchen table financial management, you might call it. Richard would go over and help with the bills every month. And then it grew way beyond that, including when we had our most recent hurricane and we had to evacuate. Dolores did not have to evacuate in the public buses. She evacuated with Richard and his family. These people have known each other for about 9-10 years now. Next slide, please. This is Sally Hearn on your left and Sherry Erskine on your right. Miss Hearn and Miss Erskine matched together for over 33 years. Miss Hearn on your left, her mother had died. She had no living family. And Mrs. Erskine on your right, if you will, became a good daughter, and over a period of 30 plus years did all the things that a good daughter would do for a mother who was widowed, if you will. Sally spent most all of her holidays in the Erskine home. If Sally needed help, Sherry was there. And then there's some hilarious stories that have grown up between these two women over the years. Sherry's daughter, as she grew up, Kate would tell you that Miss Hearn, Miss Sally, as she would call her, Miss Sally was the third person to hold me after I came home from the hospital. There's another just hilarious story. Miss Hearn was moving into a new apartment, and it was the summertime here in Savannah, and Kate had agreed to help her, and she'd gotten her boyfriend to help. And so they're moving into this new apartment in subsidized housing, and there's this big chest of drawers. Let's put it over here, Miss Hearn says. So the boyfriend humps it over there. No, let's put it over here. The boyfriend pushes it over there. No, let's try it in a different room. The boyfriend pushes it over there. And just one of those little moments where I'm thinking that the boyfriend's thinking, boy, what I'll do for love. Next slide, please. This is Mosella Collier and a little girl named June. This is many years ago when there was the assumption that a child with Down syndrome was not an adoptable child. Ms. Collier chose to challenge that. Ms. Collier, a woman of prominence in our community, she would go to the welfare office meetings every month that they had about June, and she would ask two really simple questions. What did you do last month to help June find a forever family? And after whatever was said, she would say, and what do you have lined up this month to help June find a forever family? And after months and months and months of those two questions being posed repetitively, June found a forever family. Imagine that. Next slide, please. Once a year, we gather and have a big coverage supper. And these next slides are just an expression of what this coverage supper looks like. This is my oldest daughter, by the way, Alice Kohler. Next slide, please. One of the things we've tried to do at the Cover Dish is create a world that's more beautiful than people are used to being in. This is an expression of that. Every table is decorated by in a different way by a different person. Next slide, please. And many of the tables carry these expressions of the values that we hold dear and that we are trying to promote in the larger culture. Next slide, please. The Cover Dish supper, we usually turn out between 300 and 400 people. It's the largest Cover Dish supper in our county, and the food is, quite frankly, overwhelming. Home cooked, comes from the heart, not from a commercial kitchen. Next slide, please. John Lentz on your far left with Lafayette Smith, a man that he's known now for 15 years. He's Lafayette's representative payee, helps Lafayette manage his financial affairs, and Lafayette, quite frankly, helps John not be quite so rigid and controlled in his own life as an attorney. Next slide, please. So, in broad terms, there have been a bunch of questions that I've used to kind of think about things over the years. Here are two really large framing questions. What can people come to mean to one another? And that's a relationship question between two people or a small group of people. What can people come to mean to the common good? And that's a question that invites the possibility that people can find ways to contribute to the larger good of community. And when people contribute to the larger good of community, they become more highly valued in their communities. So what can people come to mean to one another? What can people come to mean to the common good? Next slide, please. Some of the language that I try to use, and I'm primarily a language person rather than I don't do graphics very well. I try to talk to people about thick ice and thin ice. Some people live on thick ice, some people live on thin ice. We can have a very long conversation about that. I try to talk to people about relationship ghettos. And most of us, by the way, live in relationship ghettos of different kinds. And so part of the challenge of being involved, or part of the challenge of building a bigger we, is to help people step out of their own relationship ghettos. The idea of being a talent scout. I think of myself as a talent scout or a competence monger. I'm looking for capacity in people, and I'm encouraging other people to look for capacity in one another. The idea of intentional invitation, which is, again, in the format that I've worked through, which is a citizen advocacy model. I have probably issued 4,000 intentional invitations to 4,000 people over 700 matches, 3,000 personal invitations to be involved in another person's life over the 40-year period. And then also this idea of the power of purpose. I believe that this is what people are desperate for in their own lives. And that when you align yourself with someone who's marginalized and choose to stand in solidarity, you find purpose. Next slide, please. Again, some questions to sort of help people's imaginations begin to flower a bit. Can you imagine growing older together is a radical act? And as people age and the number of relationships they have in their life diminish, simply growing old together can be a radical act, particularly if you have known each other for decades, not days, and have made a decision to stick together all the way through to the end, no matter what. Can you imagine having lunch together is a radical act? Depends on who you have lunch with and where you have it. There was a time when the mayor of Savannah, that if I had lunch with the mayor of Savannah in a menu restaurant or a paper restaurant, as it was just called, it would have been a radical act because our mayor is an African-American man. And 50 years ago, that would have been a radical act. In that same restaurant today, if I went and had lunch with someone who had maybe some behavioral challenges and happened to be really loud, that might be considered a radical act as well. Sort of breaking the norm and helping people get over themselves, quite frankly. How do young people grow into good people? A good older person helps them and shows them how. And can you imagine welcoming the unexpected teacher into your life? And this is the question that does open up this idea of reciprocity and this idea that we all have something to give and we all have something to gain. Next slide, please. Got it. The 5 habits of community building that just over the years have, for me, been important. One is deep listening. I can't imagine that any of us could ever in our lives be, we can always work to be better listeners and deeper listeners. So that's a community building habit to always be working on. The ability to judge character, which is different than being judgmental. The ability to speak so people can hear, which for me means being able to listen to people closely to begin to understand how is it they listen and learn and process ideas, and can I share my ideas in that way? And that's about all people. Number 4, work the we. The answer to what is who. So instead of jumping on the computer to find something, what I always try to do is figure out who would know more about this than I do, and let me call them and ask for their advice. And then the 5th is to help people understand the difference and think about the difference in fun and joy. Fun is something that Madison Avenue and the advertisers sell us. Joy is something that happens inside us when something important happens in front of us, like when your daughter rides her bicycle for the first time without her training wheels, or like when your daughter pulls away from the curb for the first time without you in the car with her, or like when you realize that the person that you've met who really couldn't survive living in the nursing home any longer, that you've worked really hard and you've pushed public policy and you've made a bit of a pest of yourself. But yes, they will leave the nursing home. They will, at the age of 67, for the first time ever, live in their own place and be able to make choices for themselves. That would be joy rather than fun. Next slide, please. So in broad terms, the work that I've done through the years, these 2 questions: what can people come to mean to one another, and what can people come to mean to the common good? Next slide, please. This is just a picture I've always liked. Right in the center of the picture at the bottom, Jessica Foyt, a woman who moved to Savannah with her mother from Wisconsin, and then her mother moved back to Wisconsin. Jessica decided she was going to stay here on her own. Michelle Carner, to her immediate right, in the blonde hair, has been her advocate for 11 years now, and they've become close friends and great women friends. And then to Jessica's immediate left, a coworker, Tina, a coworker of Michelle's, who kind of acts as backup, if you will, when things are going on that maybe Michelle's not in a position to maybe help with. Tina pitches in, and then her husband David, and then Michelle Carner's father in the very back. And I think when you look at his face and look at his eyes, you can see how pleased he is. That Jessica, that Michelle is his daughter, and that Michelle is choosing to live a part of her life this way in solidarity with Jessica. So thank you very much. I think I'm close to 20 minutes somewhere, 23.5. I apologize.
Closing slide graphic text with thanks to Tom Kohler, Crowd Comms, Purpose Matters Conference 2022. This video was made possible with the support of an information and capacity building grant through the Department of Social Services. Produced by Belonging Matters. Belonging Matters makes every effort to provide accurate and up-to-date material. However, information is subject to change, and our materials for reference only. This video was filmed on the land of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. Logos, Belonging Matters, talksthatmatter.net.
Graphic text More Purpose Matters conference videos. To watch more videos from the Purpose Matters conference, please head to free videos on the Talks That Matter website, talksthatmatter.net. Legos Belonging Matters, Talks That Matter.